Okay. So what happened? Okay, so there's a, okay, my dad, who's kind of a okay, anyway, my dad told me this is a great book. Okay, so like in high school, you know, where you're learning about how great founders of America were and the idealistic things they did, my dad would say, that's a bunch of bullshit. You should read this book by Charles Beard about the Constitution of the United States. And what Beard showed was a bunch of moneyed interests, and they got together and they rewrote the Constitution in a way that served their own interests. And that's nothing to tell. If you're a parent, you should not tell your children that if you want them to do well. But there's a big, Charles Beard's book's a little more careful than that, but that's the basic story. And there's a huge grade of truth in it. So what happened was the Constitution and the first acts of Congress, it's a grand bargain. So what they're going to do is they realized, they knew some game theory. They knew that if you wanted to change these outcomes, you better change the game. You better change the Constitution. And I told you what a Constitution was. It's a description of who chooses what when. So in the 1790s, the U.S. Constitution created a new environment. And what they did is they did it a few blocks from here, and they did it, it's a revolution. And they're not playing by, there were procedures to amend the old Constitution, which these guys were sworn to support. They violated those procedures. They met behind closed doors, they ripped up the old Constitution, and they completely rewrote a new one. And it was devised, its economic components are devised to allow you to get political outcomes that's going to generate a surplus process. It's going to blow up the government surplus process. That's going to take those government debts that are going at deep discount, and it's going to raise them nearly to par. So what are they going to do? They do two things. First thing they do is, well, they actually do three things. First thing they do is they take the ability in the U.S. Constitution, tariffs can be issued only by the federal government. States can't issue tariffs. Second thing, the power to regulate trade is entirely centralized in the federal government. The 13 individual states cannot have their own tariff policies or their own trade policies. So now there's a unique trade policy. And then the last thing, which is, it was understood they would do this at the Constitutional Convention. Don't think of Europe now. The last thing they did was they completely bailed out all the state government debt. The federal government assumed 100% of the state government debt. And Alexander Hamilton, in his report on public credit, explains why he's doing this. What he says is that, so he realizes that and George Washington realized, you're not creating a dictatorship, you're creating a democracy where outcomes are going to be equilibrium outcomes. And what Hamilton says is he wants the federal government to nationalize the state debts because he wants the creditors of the state governments to become advocates of the central government imposing a high tariff that'll be high enough to raise the revenues to service its debts. So he's doing political economy at a high level. So he's realigning political interests. So because he wants the votes in Congress to be passed, and that's what he does. And it works. So what happens is the first Congress in 1790, after passing this law, by the way, you're still on a currency union with Spain. The things are denominated in dollars. So what happens with this new Constitution is tariff revenues go way up, the tariff rate goes way up, the federal government, it restructures the debt. It doesn't, it actually discriminates among, it pays, it offers different deals to different classes of creditors. It gives almost all of them really good deals, except, my dad was right about this, except the really poor guys. It does not bail out the Continentals. It bails them out very low, but everybody else gets a very high rate. If you bought U.S. government debt in the 1780s, you made a ton of money. So very high rates of return. So now we just go back to the questions. So why did Hamilton do this? And why did George Washington do this? Well, we go back to our lessons from before. Main question, should a government pay its debts? Well, Alexander Hamilton, in his report on public credit, says why it should pay its debts. And he gives the reasons in a more eloquent way than I did. He said it would be a really great idea not to pay your debts if you were sure you were never going to have to borrow again. And then the Secretary of Treasury teaching the President and teaching Congress says, however, life and politics is uncertain. There may be contingencies that arise in the future where we want the ability to borrow. What kind of contingencies? God forbid, war. Or perhaps nature or luck will give the United States unforeseen opportunities to make large purchases that we don't have the money at the time, but we'd like to borrow. So we want to be ready. And he makes a tax smoothing argument. But he says if you want to do that, you better have access to credit markets. And how are you? And he said right now, before we've paid our debt, we're a basket. We didn't have that term banana republic, but that's what we were. Like we were very bad credit risk. The only way to get a good credit risk is to go back, earn a jump start your reputation, and earn it by doing something quite painful. So he did it. And U.S. credit, within 8 years or so, U.S. became known as a highly trustworthy credit debtor. So European credit markets open to us. And so you could say, so talk about foresight, in 1803, his successor, Thomas Jefferson, was provided with an opportunity. Napoleon, for various interesting reasons, decided he wanted to sell Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. United States, that was a lot of money. We didn't have $15 million. So the United States borrowed, I think from Baring Brothers, a large part. We had very good credit, and we borrowed the money for the Louisiana Purchase. So that's part of the follow-up to this. Then the final thing is, so we got our fiscal house in order under Washington and Hamilton, and then only after that did we adjust our monetary arrangements, but we didn't really adjust them. So you'll and I think, okay. So I think a lot of the accounts, you hear lots of accounts about the Bank of the United States and stuff like that. That's a sideshow. So the main thing is, when we refunded the debt in the first law, we're paying in dollars. That's Spanish dollars. And then about 6 months or a year later, somebody says, well, wait a minute. We can't be a self-respecting country and have the King of Spain on our dollar. So what they did is the Congress redesigned the dollar. And what did they redesign it? It's got exactly the amount of silver that's in the silver dollar, except it's got a picture of an eagle on it, and it says U.S. dollar, but it's a copy of the Spanish dollar. So that we did that in 1791. So I think we just stayed on a currency union.